is sublime. Welcome to the original Audi R8 V8 manual, no less. Now this car is now 11 and a half years old almost. It was launched in 2007. The significance of this very car is that it was the car that Jeremy Clarkson drove when the R8 was first introduced on Top Gear. What an honour to be in Audi's official UK press car. It once left the fleet and then Audi spotted it and bought it back again. They've spent some investment restoring it and now it is here in my hands. Now a lot of you may not appreciate the significance of this car for me personally. Let me share with you because this is actually the car that changed my life. I know this is quite a dramatic statement, but back in 2009, 2 years after the R8 V8 was launched, I had saved up a deposit for my very first house. And I was looking around and shopping at houses, and listen, I've always been a die-hard petrol head through and through. And I was looking at these houses, and it just felt at the time, it just felt too early to buy myself an anchor point. And Audi had launched the R8, and it was the design language and the reviews that I'd read about the car, seeing this car on Top Gear, and the way that it looked. And at the last minute, I decided to blow my entire deposit, you guessed it, on an Audi R8. Now, I do not condone this behaviour at all. However, it transpires that buying this car truly was the gateway in terms of my life with cars, both on YouTube, and also I met my wife as a result of the original R8. I was on a road trip, I'd got the car, it was my first year owning the car. I'd never been on a proper full-blown road trip, where you wound your way down through the Alps into the south of France. And that's actually where I got my first taste of what it was like to go on a proper road trip that was nothing to do with getting from A to B, but purely to hunt down the best driving roads you could possibly find. So over the course of a few days, we wound our way down into Monte Carlo, and I was on the roof of the Fairmont Hotel, and I get talking with this wonderful girl who just so happened to be a petrol head herself, and 9 years later, we are married with a child. And honestly, I know that sounds crazy, but if it wasn't for me buying this car, and if it wasn't for me risking my family disowning me at the prospect of putting my house deposit on a supercar, or sports car in the case of the R8 V8 at least, my life would have been entirely different. At the time, people were referring to it as a supercar, which leads me on to what makes this thing so special, outside of my own personal story. Well, you've got to remember, when this car launched, you had the likes of the early generations of the Porsche 997, 911s, and the Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and cars in that area, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not detracting from those cars at all. Up until this thing launched, they were the benchmarks of a proper sports car. And then Audi, out of nowhere, pulled the covers off this car. Aesthetically, it's like the design team from Audi had had a sabbatical on Mars and brought this back with them. It was just ridiculous. The design language was so far beyond its time. Even still, I walk up to this car and it is timeless. It is so beautiful. Dare I say it, the original cars might have more beauty than even the facelifted new generation R8, which I'm about to drive tomorrow. There's something about it, those smooth curved lines. The later generation R8s adopted a more angular design language, and while they do look aggressive, there's something about these which are just a little bit more timeless. But anyway, so they launched this car, and it was like the whole industry went, oh dear, we'd better pull our fingers out. And of all brands, Audi, now don't get me wrong, Audi have an incredible history in racing and rally, but let's face it, their road cars have never been the most exotic, so nobody expected a car like this, even down to the collaborative details such as the sound system. They partnered with Bang & Olufsen on their sound system. All of these little details which added up to be a truly luxurious and exotic proposition in the sports car market. And I think that the way it looked people very quickly began referring to it as a supercar, even though its platform really was a sports car. It's only, and I say only, because these days we are pretty blasé when it comes to horsepower figures. This is only running 420 horsepower. Yes, that is still, by convention, quite a lot of power, but this was a bit of a heavy car. It was pushing over 1,600 kilograms, which for a performance lightweight sports car, it was not. A big part of that was the fact that it had a Quattro all-wheel drive system, and it was one of the first cars that really brought four-wheel drive to Porsche as a competitive proposition. Other companies had tried it, but they never quite nailed it in the package that the Audi R8 did. And the balance of the car, not long after the V8, they launched the V10. A lot more power, I think it was around about 520 horsepower. But there was something about the V8, it was a little bit lighter, and as a result, it was just a better balanced car. The chassis on this is incredible. And the steering feel as well. When I'm comparing this with even more recent R8s, it still has that slightly more organic, lovely weighted feel about it. But importantly, and this is why I'm driving this car specifically, it has that. This is the manual version. Now, the importance for me of this car being a manual is that I got it wrong when I bought my R8. My R8 was the V8 with the R-Tronic, which, well, it was crap. Let's not beat around the bush. That was a terrible gearbox. At the time, I sort of thought it was okay until I drove a friend's R8 who had the manual, and that night I basically cried myself to sleep because it was such a sweeter car. And also, they used an open gated, so you get these wonderful noises every time you shift gear. Listen to that. And it just click-clacks, that wonderful aluminium stick just banging against that open gated box. It's gorgeous. And the torque of the car, you don't find yourself needing to shift gears that often because it's so effortless. I mean, we're in third right now, doing 25, so pretty steady. And it's immediately, there's a lovely swell of torque available for you without having to downshift like you would have had to have done in the 997 generation 911 at the time. Now, after all, this is a performance car, so let's discuss its performance. So, second gear, Quattro all-wheel drive system, 420 horsepower. Let's see what it's like flat. 8,000 RPM. Listen to that click-clack of the gearbox. And the brake and the throttle pedals are so wonderfully placed for heel and toe. It's perfect. You just roll over the ball of your foot and it's there for you immediately. And the way that they've positioned the brake, that when it does get a little bit of heat in, and you do get that sponginess, which you do from these brakes, and I shall explain why shortly, it does match up wonderfully so that you get just enough travel of the brake pedal that when your foot does meet the accelerator when you're downshifting and you want to blip for heel and toe, it just matches up perfectly. However, with this being Audi's first foray into the world of road-going sports cars, it did inherit some components from the parts bin. And what I mean by that is, despite the fact that this was at the time their flagship sports car, they used the brakes of the Audi RS4. For a conventionally fast estate car and saloon car, not an issue. For a much faster sports car, this suffered quite badly from brake fade. In fact, I had the scare of my life when I was taking this through the Alps on that trip that I was talking about earlier, and I had complete brake failure because the brakes just boiled over, fluid in the lines went, and my pedal hit the floor through the Alps. Not an experience you want to replicate. It is in fact the experience that keeps me buying carbon ceramic brakes, even though I know that the technology and ability of standard steel rotors is far superior these days. It was a weak point of the car putting the RS4 brakes on their flagship supercar. It did suffer pretty bad fade, so much so that my rotors warped completely. I had completely warped discs, and yeah, I had to take it to the dealership and have an official set of Audi rotors fitted to an R8. Not the cheapest of experiences. Now, of course, having since owned this car, in the 11-year period that it has been available on the roads. To say that I have had some experience driving other cars might be somewhat of an understatement. But as a result, it does highlight that actually this is quite a civilized and refined version of, I guess if you've never experienced an R8, what you might think would be a pretty hardcore fast sports car. I mean, look, it's not that loud. It has an Audi V8 barbel for sure, but it's definitely not a loud barbel. And I remember when these cars launched, there was quite a lot of people putting aftermarket exhausts on them. At the time, I never felt the need for it because I was still exploring my initial experience into the world of performance cars, and I was just over the moon to simply be in one. But today, having experienced a lot of quite serious supercars, I'm aware that this is actually quite a quiet car. However, if you drop the windows, you can appreciate that barbel just a little bit more, isn't it? It's lovely, isn't it? Listen to that. Wow. And you know what? Oh, the torque, it's such an effortless car. It's not fast. It's not. I know that sounds stupid. Look, obviously by conventional road cars, it's swift. But it's not an intimidatingly quick car like some supercars, particularly modern day supercars. That's one of the reasons that I started the Modern Classic series, was that sometimes I look down at the speedo of some of these new cars and I'm like, how on earth did I arrive here? Like, the numbers are just bonkers, and the event of getting there has been uneventful. But with cars like this, there's not too much horsepower, and you can exploit it, and you can really rev up and use all of that 8,000 RPM and then clink and clack your way down through this very engaging gearbox. Something else I'm finding with the latest, greatest supercars, because everyone's going for Nürburgring lap times, eventually at some point physics takes over, and in order to control mass and have something with number plates going that fast, your suspension can get a little bit compromised, and as a result, as a daily driver, it is a little bit stiff. This is chilled. This is an Audi. One thing that did surprise me though, along with the brakes and a little bit of the understeer, was the, dare I call it, infotainment system. This was Audi's MMI system, which even in 2007 felt like you were using MS-DOS. Weirdly, it was as bad then as it is now. Like, that infotainment system, even in 2007, that sucked. So comments below. Do let me know what you think of the Audi R8. For me, as I've mentioned, somewhat of a game changer, and to be back in one manual version is so special. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Ciao.